All righty. We did do something on Worldview a few weeks, I think like a month ago. I talked about a few issues with Worldview, but I talked about the issue with always after the elections. I don't know. Anyway, I did something like a month ago. I talked about this a little bit, but I'm going to be a little more show some statistics here tonight. Go a little deeper, but yeah. So we obviously have a crisis of worldview in our country and world, especially our country and in the church. So um, there's more than enough resources out there if you want to go deeper on this topic. I've shown these books before. If you want to get more acquainted with the topic, there's so many books on the topic of worldview. I've lost track of them. Seems like two or three come out every year or more. So if you want to go deeper, these are all good books, good starting points. I think James Sire's book, The Universe Next Door, is one of the most famous books, one of the standard texts. I think he's even on like the sixth edition now. That's like the fifth edition I have out there. I think it's like the sixth. I have his first edition, and then I like after that I like realized, oh, I'm way behind. He's on like the fifth edition now. I do have the fifth edition somewhere. But anyway, I think he's on to his sixth edition. And there's some more books, but I'll send this out on the PDF if you want to go deeper and look at some of these. But anyways, it is a common. Sometimes it's a common slogan that people say it doesn't matter what you believe as long as you believe in something. Well, that's kind of problematic. I mean, yeah, of course we need to believe in something, but what we actually believe in matters. You could believe in all kinds of things that are not based in reality and obviously cause damage to your life. So, you do need to know what it is you're saying you believe in. I think we all know that. It's common sense. Um, we tend to view our faith sometimes as simply sometimes just about getting people we say saved and then worried about where they go when they die. But that not that that's irrelevant, but the reality of it is that we have to live in this world and we have to navigate this world, and all of us are in different parts of the country and dealing with different kinds of people, and we all deal with people with different worldviews. There's no doubt about that, and it's just impossible to really even navigate life without a worldview that's maybe being you may be in the process of still forming your worldview, or else you're working on it. I mean, it's kind of like a lifelong endeavor, some people say. It kind of is, really. But the point is that there's more than just simply having a relationship with Jesus. As I say, Christianity is a worldview. Your faith is a gateway to reality. So it's not just believing something, so you can get somewhere when you die. I mean, faith, the step of faith you make is Christianity or belief, biblically speaking, it's all worldview. It answers many questions about life, answers the big questions. So there's more to it than simply a personal relationship with Jesus. So I hope that you do view your faith as a worldview as well, because that they go hand in hand with each other. So a little quick definition here. A worldview is an explanation, interpretation of the world, and second, an application of this view. So it's a way that we view reality, and it's kind of just the way we navigate this world around us, and then we apply generally our worldview into reality. That's what we have to do. It's not just believing the right things, it's also applying it into our lives, into the world around us. Many things influence how we form a worldview. Obviously, family plays a role, peers and friends play a role. Education, of course, when you go to college, sometimes you may not have a real solidified worldview, and then you go off to school for 4 years and you listen to your professors or your peers there, and then your worldview begins to really like expand. And you're like, oh, now I know what I really believe about this, and now I really know what I believe about that. And you assume that it's all settled until you get out of college and you realize, oh, there's other things I need to think about now. But the point is, education can play a huge role in shaping people's worldview. Now, as you probably know, if you go to a secular school, like non-Christian, I mean, which many universities are non-Christian, they're just secular institutions, they're obviously going to promote a secular worldview. So as I always say, if you are a believer, a Christian, and you're going to a college or you're sending your kids there, you need to know that this isn't going to be a Christian worldview college. I mean, or a biblical worldview college. That's why you have to make a decision whether you want to send your kids to a Bible college or a Christian school or, liberal arts Christian school or just whatever. But the point is you have to think through it. Sometimes Christian kids show up on a secular university and then they hear things they've never heard before, and it just takes their faith gets a real hit, and they're just not used to hearing these things, so they have to work through those things. Hopefully they can. Some don't, but some do. I try to help the ones that want to work through it if they're interested, which some are. Obviously, social media is playing a huge role in shaping people's worldview. All you have to do is go online now. You can get information in a split second, and you've got all these contrary views, contradictory views, authorities saying this and other authorities saying that. I mean, social media is playing a huge role in shaping people's worldview. So a worldview matters because it certainly impacts the choices you're going to make. It impacts how you raise your family. Definitely going to impact how you vote. And of course, how you vote is going to shape legislation, which impacts people's lives. So as I said several months ago, when I did my politics and faith integration teaching, I said you just can't totally punt out of politics because politics impacts your neighbor, and you're called to love your neighbors yourself. So you can't just suddenly, yuck, politics, I don't care about that. Well, you have to care somewhat because laws are being passed all the time. They're either going to help your neighbor or hurt your neighbor. And of course, it impacts how we spend our time and money, how we use our time, especially when we have a specific worldview that'll impact that. So either our worldview will help us see the world clearly, or it'll keep us from seeing the world clearly. Our worldview will help us to live well or lead us astray. And today, of course, we know that there are many people going astray. Many people don't have clarity about certain things. There's a lot of confusion, a lot of chaos. There's confusion about sexuality. There's confusion about gender. There's confusion about this moral issue, that moral issue. There's confusion about, who to trust, if we can trust anybody, any kind of authority anymore. So these things are all going on a regular basis. Now, I may recommend a really good book by Nancy Pearcey. If you've never heard of her, you can look her up, but she wrote this book a ways back in the 90s. I think it was the mid 90s, called Total Truth. And her concern was that we do not view Christianity as something that impacts the whole of reality. Like our faith we don't see it impacting everything. We see it just kind of like a privatized faith where it's just, I have my personal relationship with Jesus and I pray to him and I go to heaven when I die and that's it. And she's saying that's just not what we should be doing. So she thinks that we need to understand that our faith is a worldview and it impacts the whole of reality. So she tried to get people out of that dichotomy between a secular, like where we view spiritual things, religious things as going to church and praying and maybe serving God in some capacity, and then all the other stuff out there, such as our secular vocations. That's just the problem. We view them as secular vocations when they are. It's a spiritual endeavor. Everything we do, whether you're a doctor, a mechanic, a plumber, a teacher, a writer, I mean, whatever you do, you take your worldview into the marketplace of ideas, and we try to be salt and light wherever we are, right? So that's a really good book. You should try to get a hold of that if you can. So let me give a few statistics here. So these are done by a guy named George Barna. George Barna is the expert on doing the statistics and interviewing groups of people and then piling up the statistics and coming up with data. And this was done at the Cultural Research Center at Arizona State University, which is located in Glendale, Arizona. That's in the Phoenix metropolitan area. Maybe some of you are around there. But so this information was compiled in that survey, and most of it can be found on their website if you go to Arizona Christian University. So if you want to go deeper, you can certainly go there. All the information's there. I'm not hiding anything or trying to cover up anything. It's all there. But the first thing that he found out was in this, I'll show you some numbers in a minute, but that only half of evangelical pastors possess a biblical worldview, even lower for a lot of denominations. And that was one statistic he discovered. And he said here, barely half of evangelical pastors, only 51%, have a biblical worldview. And the level is even lower in other denominations, according to latest research from Cultural Research Center, Arizona Christian University. This new research reveals that many American pastors are proving to be incapable of resisting the pressure of cultural influences when it comes to worldview. Instead, it appears that the nation's pastors, in fact, doing what they believe, but those beliefs are simply not harmony with biblical teaching. It's very hard to pastor these days because there's so many, the culture's changing so fast, and there's so much outside influence in the culture around you, and you have congregants that are just going on their phones and, you know, beep, 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 and finding stuff online and finding this website here and this link here, and then going to their pastors and say, hey, what about this? I mean, so everyone's kind of their own self-learner now and their own self-scholar. And so it's hard for pastors to try to keep up with all this information. And so I'm not surprised to kind of see these statistics. A pastor's role today is, I think, is much harder than it was 30, 40 years ago. At the advent of technology and all the information that's out there, it's a lot harder today. So we need to be praying for pastors. It's a very difficult, it's very difficult being a pastor. A lot of them quit, as you know. If you still get statistics, a lot of them just can't do it. But also, if you look up on that website, this is kind of interesting. They found out that today's preteens up to age 13 are confused by the contradiction between their parents' actions and lifestyles and their self-identified Christian beliefs. In fact, the survey they did identified a staggering disparity between the number of parents who claim to be Christians, 67%, and those who actually possess a biblical worldview, 2%. The study's detailed look at the worldview of today's parents specifically identifies a fading biblical Christian is quickly being replaced by syncretism, which is a worldview that merges otherwise incompatible philosophies of life into a made-to-order worldview that incorporates enough biblical elements to be minimally Christian in nature. It means that it's just they have a little bit of Christianity in there, a few elements, but they're mixing it with other worldviews. That's what a syncretism does, by the way. It's a mixture of beliefs. And according to Barna, this new found faith also leads to a lot of nominalism. It's a lot of Christian nominalism, meaning that there's a lot of belief in Christianity by name only. Like people just believe it. They don't really believe it internally. They haven't really embraced it inwardly into their heart, and it hasn't soaked deep down into them. It's more just professing things like you're supposed to believe as a Christian, but they really don't buy into it. And then they mix a lot of these other beliefs out there into it. So that's kind of a difficult thing. And this is interesting that Barna notes that millennials, that's the generation born between 1984 and 2002. I'm not a millennial, by the way. I was born in 1968, so pooey. But we'd probably have kids that are millennials, or some of you may be millennials. I don't know. But excuse me. But he says that millennials, a generation born between 1984 and 2002, are a very significant force in American culture. Let's consider the tail end of millennial generation, those age 18 to 24. That segment represents the latter third of the generation, comprising roughly 30 million individuals. Based on historical tracking, this segment represents a bridge between their generation and a succeeding generation, widely known as Generation Z. That's, you maybe know people in the Generation Z area. Such a bridge group is often a hybrid torn between the norms of their own generation, new thoughts and ways of the upcoming group. Bridgers who qualify as don'ts, mean don't know, don't care, or don't believe that God exists, outnumber born-again Christians by a 2-1 margin, 31 to 16%. Now, these are some of the things those people believe. The definition of the God, these are bridgers. These are people between the millennial and the Generation Z, by the way. These are people that are in that range. Definition of God, less than 4 out of 10 bridgers believe that God is the all-knowing, powerful, perfect, and just creator of the universe, who rules that universe today, nearly as many of them doubt or reject his existence. The creation narrative, Bridgers are more likely to believe in chance and randomness than in authority and creative orderly power of God. Only about 4 out of 10 embrace the biblical account of creation as valid. Basis of truth, just 3 out of 10 Bridgers contend that God himself is the foundation of truth. 6 out of every 10 don't believe in absolute moral truth. That's no surprise. As far as the Bible, less than 3 out of 10 Bridgers accept the Bible as the true and accurate words of God, and therefore authoritative and relevant to how we live. Purpose of life, most Bridgers contend that the ultimate purpose of life is happiness and pleasure. Only 1 out of every 6 believes we exist to know, love, and serve God with all our heart, mind, strength, and soul. As far as salvation, only 1/6 of 18 to 24-year-olds believe that they experience eternity in the presence of God, solely as a basis of confessing their sins and asking Jesus Christ to save them. Almost none of the Bridgers believe they'll experience hell. Most of them either believe they simply will cease to exist, be reincarnated, experience heaven, for a variety of reasons other than being forgiven and born again through Jesus. Marriage, a mere 1 out of every 5 Bridgers believes the marriage of one man to one woman is God's creation, designed for all cultures. In essence, Bridgers argue that love is a feeling, marriage is an option, whose contours we may define. And then when it comes to religious pluralism, that's the view of how different roads lead to God. About 6 out of 10 Bridgers believe that all faiths are of equal value, so that one's faith of choice doesn't matter. This corresponds with the widespread belief that there is no absolute moral spiritual truth. Now, this was a chart done. He surveyed 5,000 adults, 18 or older. You can see the self-identified segment. You have just people that say they're Christian name only. You have born-again Christian, evangelical Christian, born-again integrated disciple. Those are some of their views right there about what they believe. You can see that certainly it's maybe, I don't know. I mean, the numbers are a little, as far as obviously for just the nominal Christian category, of course, they should be lower. But anyway, it's kind of interesting. Now, one survey that was also done a ways back was a survey with 3,000 or 2,000 adults 18 and up. And this was reported in this was reported in the book Soul Searching. And they found out the millennials don't know what a worldview is, or if they have one. They do have one. If they do have one, they're relying on to form beliefs and the experiences they have and make decisions based on those beliefs. So what they found out is that many of the survey of 2,000 people they interviewed, some of them believe it's called moral therapeutic deism. You may never heard of that. That is back here on this slide. Moralistic therapeutic deism is a view that God exists, but he's very distant from our lives. People are supposed to just be good to each other. The whole goal is just to be moral and nice. The universal purpose of life is to be happy and feeling good about oneself. There are no absolute moral truths. God allows good people into heaven, and God places very limited demands on people. So you can see here that the numbers, as far as what people are believing, they have the millennials, they have the Generation X, they have the boomers, and then they have the builders. They kind of have like a merge between the millennials and Gen X. Obviously, some are moral therapeutic deism is pretty high in those categories. Anyway, okay. Well, let's go to this. What does it even mean to say we have a biblical worldview? Well, obviously, to say you have a biblical worldview would mean that you need to believe in the inspiration, authority, and reliability of the Bible to navigate reality. If you don't believe that, then you can't have a biblical worldview. And if you don't believe that, then obviously you take your worldview from other authorities, such as culture, social media, and peers, right? That's just the way it's going to go. If you don't start with everyone's got an authority, all right, that they start from. It could be themselves. I'm my own authority, as we'll talk about. I interpret reality the way I want to. I adjust reality what I want it to be. Or you get your authority from a particular belief system, such as some of those other ones I pointed back to here. Maybe it's Marxism or secular humanism or Eastern mysticism or nihilism or something. But the point is that you're going to you got to have a starting point somewhere. So if it's not a biblical worldview, it's going to be somewhere else, obviously. I've definitely done enough teaching on the reliability and authority of the Bible. So if you miss those teachings, it's on my YouTube channel. Just type in Eric Chabot. You can also follow or subscribe, and you get every clip that's uploaded. You don't have to ask me for it. I don't have to send out. It just comes to your email. If you subscribe, just type in my name. But I did do a teaching on this, the authority and reliability of the Bible, but these are some good books to get hold of if you want to go deeper. Couple books there in archaeology. Now, just a couple things about inspiration and authority. Of course, the Bible says it's inspired. I'll talk about that more in a second, but Paul talks about that in 2 Timothy 3:16 about the Bible being inspired, that it means that God, whatever. We don't know exactly what the inspiration process looks like because we don't see God do it to the original authors, how that worked, the mechanics of it, but it means that God inspired the original authors. He influenced them. Now, I've talked about this before. I don't know what that looks like. I don't think it's a dictation thing like Muslims believe. There's some sort of relationship with the human author and the Holy Spirit. There's a meeting point. I don't know how that works, but it works. And God, it's God breathed. That's what I mean. Scripture is God breathed. Okay. And then when we talk about the Bible being authoritative, you would have to somehow, as a biblical worldview, believe in these tenets right here. You'd have to have these starting points to even say the Bible is an authority. You'd have to believe that objective truth exists and it's knowable, that we can know objective truth. Objective truth is something that exists outside of yourself, right? Like I talked about, your faith doesn't make God exist. Okay, your faith doesn't make Jesus rise from the dead. God exists or he doesn't exist. He existed before you believed in him, right? He's outside of you. He's not, your subjective feelings and your inner workings don't make him exist. He was already way out there and outside of yourself. He's all around the world, obviously, but he existed long before you believed in him. And either you believe in him or you don't, and either he exists or he doesn't exist. It's an objective truth claim. Just like Jesus rising from the dead. You believing that doesn't make it true. Either Jesus rose from the dead or he didn't rise from the dead. Either Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth or he wasn't. We know he was, but we're making historical claims. Okay, your faith doesn't change history. Okay, history is objective. It's an objective claim we're making. Okay, you either believe that the evidence is there and it's true that Jesus rose from the dead, or you don't, right? But you believing it doesn't make it true. And then number two, of course, you'd have to believe God exists. Obviously, you're making a claim about reality. And then, I'm sorry, I got my numbering off here. It should be three. If God exists, then miracles are possible, because if God exists, he can do miracles. Miracles are possible in action. If God exists, miracles are on the table. Miracles can be used to confirm a message from God, and that's what God did through the prophets, through certain prophets like Moses and Elijah, and of course, Jesus. And then we come to the New Testament. The New Testament's historically reliable. You'd have to trust the New Testament documents, that they're recording the truth, that the authors told the truth, that Jesus is who he is. And the New Testament number 7 says Jesus claimed to be the Lord. He is God. And number 8, Jesus' claim to be God was confirmed by his fulfillment of prophecies about himself, his sinless and miraculous life, of course, his prediction, accomplishment of his resurrection. Therefore, Jesus is the Lord, he's God, and if Jesus is God, then Jesus speaks on the authority of Scripture, and Jesus endorsed the authority of the Old Testament, the divine inspiration of the Old Testament, throughout his ministry, actually quoted from it quite a bit. There was no New Testament at the time of Jesus anyway. And Jesus, of course, talked about the coming of the New Testament. He talked about how the Holy Spirit would come to them and he recall what Jesus said and taught to them, and he would inspire them through the Holy Spirit. The Spirit would be the one that helps them to write the New Testament. And so Jesus talked about the coming of the New Testament. And then basically on Jesus's authority alone, we believe in the inspiration authority of both testaments. Okay. So these are some of the things that we would need to embrace to even have any kind of biblical worldview, these starting points. Okay. But, some people, you may say, well, I don't know, people, people aren't reflective, people aren't that deep, nobody cares about worldview issues. They just don't think this deeply about these kinds of things. People are just trying to make a living, they're trying to put food on the table, and I understand that. But, we are disciples of Jesus, and we are called to do what he says. And of course, he says, one of the greatest commandments is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. It says, "Hear, O Israel, Lord our God is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength, and with all your mind, with all your strength." So, we don't have the luxury, we can't afford to just sit back and say, well, nobody cares about worldview issues, and I don't care, and so I don't need a worldview, and I just, whatever, I'm just going to do what the culture does. No, you're a disciple of Jesus, so you're supposed to be different. And so based on the life of Jesus, we're called to be transformed. And part of being transformed and conformed to what Jesus is mean that we're called to have a transformed mind, transformed character, transformed relationships, transformed habits, transformed acts of service, and transformed influence. So all this relates to having a worldview. So you just can't really punt out and say, I just don't care. Not saying anyone here is doing that, by the way. The question becomes, do we renew our minds in the land of social media more than the scriptures? Because social media it's just overwhelming. There's just so much information, it doesn't end. So there are some reasons why you may say, well, why wouldn't a Christian have a consistently biblical worldview? Like, what about some of these statistics we've seen? Why is this, that we see this? And there are some reasons I think that makes sense. First of all is ignorance. Obviously, we may just be ignorant of what the Bible teaches regarding important topics or important issues of faith and practice, right? Worldview issues. We may just be ignorant. We just haven't really taken the time to even look into it, right? It's a basic issue, of course. Secondly, some Christians are going to obey only certain parts of Scripture, right? They're not going to accept all of it. And so this may be because they want to have certain sinful lifestyles, or they want the approval of others. They're more worried about other people think. Having possible persecution or rejection. I mean, we see many Christian leaders that buckle under the issue of the gay marriage thing. I just saw Amy Grant decided she's going to marry her gay niece, and she says God's all accepting, and the whole goal of the Christian life is just to love God and love others. And so she embraces homosexuality as fine. So she's ignorant, and she's selecting parts of Scripture and not accepting other parts. And she's probably more worried about other people think. She's looking for the approval of others, could be, like some of us do. And one day, we all answer to Jesus. We don't answer to anybody else. So in the end, you can get the approval of your friends and peers, but you won't answer to them at the judgment seat. So at the end of the day, God's not going to ask you, what did your friends think about that issue? Or what did your peers think about that issue? Or what did the culture think about that issue? No, he won't ask us that. So I hope that we understand that, looking for temporary acceptance by our friends and peers comes with a cost in the long run. Of course, sometimes Christians are just deceived by the lies of the world. We're too tuned into what the culture thinks, and we don't have good discernment, and we build our worldview through what the culture is saying, right? And so we just end up getting deceived. Just not discerning, not taking the time to look into something, and just kind of taking a lazy approach. And being gullible and undiscerning isn't a sign of spiritual growth. Okay, a renewed mind is a discerning mind. Discern means to distinguish, to separate out, to diligent search, to examine something. It means to distinguish truth from error, to know right from wrong. Discernment is the ability to properly discriminate or make determinations and know the truth from error, and it's related to wisdom. So, no, we can't know every single thing, but the point is that we should realize that being gullible isn't a sign of spiritual maturity. And some Christians, of course, just give up on the biblical worldview because they're having issues in their own life. Perhaps they're struggling with doubt, discouragement. God is not coming through for them the way he thought. Maybe they're just discouraged by what they see in the culture or whatever it is. But, sometimes our emotions get the better of us, or mood swings, and we just need to, sometimes what I say, tell ourselves the truth. I have a book on my shelf that says that, tell yourself the truth. Came out in the 70s, I think. It's an old book. But anyways, and many Christians simply do not have a consistently biblical worldview because it's difficult. That means that to understand a biblical worldview and look into these things takes work. It takes study, it takes discipline, it takes some time to look into those things, such as, reading some of those books I showed you on the slides. And when a culture is going so fast and we're busy, there's just a temptation to resist that. It's just like, heck with it. I don't have time to develop my worldview. I don't have time to teach others worldview. I just don't have time. And it's hard for some people to really put in the effort. And I understand that not everybody has the same schedules. I know that some of us may be working 2 jobs. We have multiple responsibilities. I'm not trying to act like I don't care and understand that's there, but we still have to think about our time and how we use it, and whether we could put a little more time into this, okay, and informing our worldview, investing in it, right? Some of the common worldview questions that come up regularly, these impact all of our lives, are the question of where we come from, who we are, our identity, our purpose in life, how should we live, moral issues, destiny, what happens when we die. And then the late, great Dallas Willard, who passed away, I think about 3 years ago, he had 3 other issues he brought up. He talked about what counts as knowledge of reality. How do you gather knowledge about reality? What does it mean to say somebody's who's living the good life? What does that mean? And who's really a good person? So he added those in there. Those are kind of interesting. So the first question of a worldview, of course, is who gets to be God, right? That's the ultimate question in the worldview. The first question is who gets to be God? In their book, Hidden Worldviews, these are some of the worldviews where people pick certain gods, right? Not just the God of the Bible. They pick certain other gods. That's what idolatry is, by the way. Obviously, there's the God of individualism, where we are just at the center of reality. Everything revolves around us. Or secondly, it could be consumerism, where our worth and identity is in what we own, all the stuff we have. Some people say the person with the most toys dies in the end, but actually the person who has the most toys ends up dying too, and you don't take any of your toys with you, as you know. Thirdly, nationalism. Sometimes our country becomes the only thing that is on our mind, and we're consumed by nationalism. Not that we shouldn't care at all. I'm not saying that. I've talked about that before, but sometimes you just get wrapped up in our whole identities in our country. Of course, that happens in all kinds of countries. It can happen anywhere. Or moral relativism, where I have my truth and you have your truth, and it's all our perspective, and there is no objective truth. Or we just believe salvation is done through therapy. We just think psychology can answer everything. Psychology can tell you why there's something wrong with you, or why you have this problem or that problem. Those are just some of the competing issues that are out there. And as Natasha Crane says so well here in her book Faithfully Different, she says, as far as secularism, there's still a lot of secularism in our culture. She says, secularism is a neutral. It's a worldview based on some very specific assumptions. Feelings are the ultimate guide. Happiness is the ultimate goal. Judging is the ultimate sin, and God is the ultimate guess. And that's very true. All those points. Those things are very prevalent in our culture today. You can get her book, Faithfully Different, by the way. So let's talk about just a few of these worldview issues. So one question, of course, is where we came from, because that is a huge issue. What is the nature of humanity? Are we just a highly complex meat machine or a person made in the image of God? Are we creating the image of Are we creating the image and likeness of a personal God? That is the core number one question that leads to all other worldview questions, right? Where do we come from? What is the nature of humanity? And, as Richard Dawkins said in his book, Growing Up in the Universe, he's a very staunch atheist. It's quite a contrast to Genesis 1. He says here, we are machines built by DNA whose purpose is to make copies of the same DNA. This is exactly what we are for. We are machines for propagating DNA, and the propagation of DNA is a self-sustaining process. Is every living object's sole reason for living? That's quite a contrast to Genesis 1, where it talks about we're creating the image and likeness of God, as you can see. And then the late William Provine, who passed away from cancer, I think about 6-7 years ago, had a really, really uplifting comment. He was a staunch neo-Darwinian atheist. He worked at Cornell University, professor of biological science, but he said, before he died, he said, let me summarize my views on what modern evolutionary biology tells us loud and clear. There are no gods, no purposes, no goal-directed forces of any kind. There is no life after death. When I die, I'm absolutely certain I'm going to be dead. That's the end for me. And there is no ultimate foundation for ethics, no ultimate meaning in life, and no free will for humans either. So science can't really address any of the issues he's talking about. So he's already he's talking about philosophy, really. They're not science. He doesn't know it. So that's a pretty bankrupt view of reality, but that's what some people believe. And if that's your worldview, then yes, you will be your own God, and everything you will be at the center of the universe, obviously. Because if we are just the result of a blind cosmic accident, a completely evolutionary naturalistic worldview, then obviously God does not exist and is irrelevant. We came from a purposeless process. We're headed to dust and death. And of course, we're just here to propagate the species. We don't have any ultimate purpose, and we're just simply here to survive. That's what's taught on college campuses, secular college campuses. And it's obviously sad that many students will take one class in biology and take it as a total authority and assume it's just settled. This is the correct view of reality, and that's settled. But some students will do that, sadly. Another worldview issue has to do with morality, of course. Whether God is the actual foundation of moral values and moral duties. Everybody has moral values and moral duties. Or do humans create their own moral values and moral duties? That's going to play a huge role in worldview issues, because we all have moral disagreements with people. But, what are our moral values? Where do they come from? Things like love, justice, mercy, kindness, those things. Moral duties are your obligations. Do those things flow from the nature of God, or are they just something that you just come up with yourself, and everybody has their own morality? Of course, that's what moral relativism is. Everybody makes up their own moral truth. And everybody, there's no ultimate authority at all. And of course, another worldview question is, what's wrong with the world? People say, I'm here to make the world better. I want to make the world a better place. Well, how do you even know what a better world looks like, and who gets to decide? Is that your opinion, or is that based off some sort of authority, or what? Because, one person may say the world will look better this way if I commit genocide at people. Another person may say look better if I do this. So, you've got to have some sort of standard in there. Without God, there is no standard for what a better world would look like. And then, of course, your worldview would have to explain what's wrong with humans. Why are humans able to commit horrible atrocities and then, of course, do amazing things, right? We can really do some incredibly morally right things, but we also can do some horribly wrong things. What explains that? Of course, we think the fall of man explains that, because we know in Genesis the humans have we're made in the image of God, but of course we have a relationship somehow related back to our first ancestors, which are Adam and in the garden. And of course we can do some pretty horrible things now because of that sin problem we have, but also we still have God's moral imprint on us. We still can do some really incredible things because we're still made in the image of God. It's not like God erased it. It just means that we need to be redeemed now through Jesus, right? And then what is reality? Who gets to decide what reality is? Is reality just everything's just physical? Is the material world all there is? Is everything I can just see, taste, touch, hear, smell? Or is there anything that transcends the physical world, right? That's a big worldview question. And then, of course, identity is a huge topic these days. You know, identity is what defines us, what drives us, what motivates us, who we are. You know, are we an image bearer of God? Do we find our identity as an image bearer of God? Or do we find our identity in what you own? Or you find your identity where you live, in your sexuality, your career, maybe your ethnicity, your political positions? People are finding their identity in those things today, right? So identity is a huge worldview question. Do we find our, as individuals, if there's no God, of course, you get to call the shots. You get to set your own set of moral values and moral duties. You get to determine what people group has value, dignity, and rights. You get to decide what standard to abide by as far as like what the world should look like. You come up with your own standard. You get to determine what happiness is. It's all based on your subjective feelings, right? But if God exists, then he is the source of our moral values and moral duties. He is the grounding point for why we have equality, dignity, value, and rights, which we fight for all the time with people. He is the source for, or he is the standard for what the world should look like, and he is the only one that can tell us what really real happiness is. So big contrast there, right? Big contrast. So yeah, I think that we do have the ability to be equipped and informed on our worldview. You know, we have, as I've said before, I did this a couple weeks ago, we obviously have a huge problem that the transgenderism movement is just like, phew, it's just going and just growing so much and at such a fast pace. And we see people pushing for transitioning in teens and younger people, and just all kinds of stories, horror stories, and people that are just pushing this as a, you know, a perfectly normative thing. And the church wasn't ready for this because we first had to deal with sexuality topic, and then this came along and just like hit us like, whoa, this came out of nowhere, but it's everywhere. You know, we have stories now of people who were told to detransition because they had gender dysphoria. That's where you have a disconnect between your mind and your body. Your mind tells you you're one thing and your biological sex tells you another thing, whereas in Christianity, we keep those things together. We don't make a dichotomy between the two. But the point is that people were told to transition, and it's been a disaster. So this movement is picked up a lot of steam. We know that our current government pushes it just nonstop. I mean, legislation, everything. It's just they're just obsessed with it. And it's really, really scary because it's hurting a lot of people. But, you know, we as believers, we should be informed about this topic. You should be able to know what a biblical worldview is on this topic and how we talk about it with other people versus, oh, I don't want to talk about it. Oh, it's just, whatever. I mean, you know, people are going to do what they're going to do, and I just don't care. I mean, whatever. I mean, it's hurting children. So we should want to help kids and be informed about this topic. Okay. And so I encourage you to get any of these books. They're really good. But yeah, that's a worldview issue that we should be informed about. And then, you know, when it comes to something like abortion, I mentioned this before, you can go to Scott Klusendorf's website called Life Training Institute. There's all kinds of resources on there. You get his book, The Case for Life. That's another worldview topic we should be able to talk about. Not the only topic, but we should know how to talk about that with other people. You don't even need the Bible. Okay, you can, well, I mean, you need the Bible a little bit, but still you can make a case for pro-life without the Bible, is what I'm saying, on the science alone. But there's all kinds of resources out there if we just are willing to put in the time. That's another good book, Defending Life, a moral legal case against abortion. So yeah, there's a lot of worldview topics that are going on, certainly more than the ones I mentioned. But what I think that the problem is that, one, maybe we just haven't put any time into it. And I understand people have different schedules. Like I said, I'm sensitive to that. But we really should take the time to be thinking about our worldview and what we're educating our families with and encouraging them. And of course, maybe your churches you're in don't really do much with worldview. Some churches have worldview classes they teach. I've taught worldview, of course, many times, but there's so many resources out there now online. You can go get course. I'm sure you can watch courses, books. There's all kinds of stuff. But when you hear something out there in the culture, you should be able to filter it through your worldview. No doubt about it. Okay. But I really hope that we do view our worldview as more than simply, our faith more than simply as having a personal relationship with Jesus. That's part of our faith, but it's not the only thing. Okay. So that's about all I have. We can have a nice discussion now if you want, and I will stop recording.